Same measure is brought to thee. That's just how He's here to be. My guiding light, so dear to see, leads ever on eternity. All for the faith to follow on. Through days with His dear Son. Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done, upon the earth, just as in heaven. God's mighty love is leading still, and He will do in parts of heaven. Will and forgive and sorrow great, oh far and near. Where tribulation takes its toll, and desolation breaks our soul. Jesus has said He takes us out. He washes away all conflict. But He was here for His Son told. My Father's hand, no empty soul. Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done, upon the earth, just as in heaven. God's mighty hand is leading still.
Everyone's here that should be here. We're not missing anyone, family-wise.
I did not know God's reasons why, but I can trust His hands high. He sees the picture perfectly. His plan is great to heart. And through it all, if I endure, You give to me the morning star, the promise of redemption here, the light of God, dear past of year. Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done, upon the earth, just as in heaven. God's mighty hand is leading still, and He will do whatever He will. Alpha, Omega, first and last, Lord of the future and the past. Whatever comes, He'll lead us through. He's in our paths, both old and new. Sure in His strength as times before, He is alive forevermore. He was and is, and there will be the worthy Lamb upon the sea. Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done, upon the earth, just as in heaven. God's mighty hand is leading still, and He will do whatever He will. When trouble rises like a storm, when hope is light and failure sworn, when flesh was sea out of control, when fears like waves around me roll. I will remember as I go that He is great, He will be strong. I walk by faith and not by sight. For it's a vision for the light. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, across the earth, just as in heaven. God's mighty hand is living still, and He will do what there He will. Glory and joy, rejoicing, the pilgrims here around. Bring on the voice that calls us, renew and faithful God. The brothers all to glory, with every face steadfast, on towards the golden tower, where we shall rest at last. It was with voice of singing we left the land of light, to pass to glorious music far over hills outside. Oh, brothers, was it sorrow? The thousand pearls were lost. Our hearts have looked on Jesus, and must we count the cost.
We're here today in memory of Mona. And Mona had lots of hymns that she enjoyed singing, and the hymns that we'll sing today are some that she appreciated, some that she enjoyed, some that she chose. The first hymn on the leaflet is actually the hymn 311, Love Supreme. This was a hymn that she had mentioned in one of the meetings some time ago. And she had a little thought about the hymn. She said, the other day, I was working at my sewing machine, and a hymn came into my mind. I just had to get it up and find my hymn book. It was number 311. I pass my days in sweet content within the chambers of the King. I hear his voice and see his face. His love inspires the song I sing, in harmony with heaven above, one spirit with the God I love. And the person that had remembered her sharing this said at the time, this was outstanding and continues to be, that an older person, her spouse was gone, she was living alone, and her health was failing, could say, I pass my days in sweet content. And they mentioned that to us, this will always be Mona's hymn. So we can sing this hymn together in thinking of Mona in this respect.
My God.
Our Heavenly Father, we're grateful today because it is your desire and your will that mankind could even spend eternity with thee, and the souls of men could live with thee for all eternity. And we are grateful for our sister Mona, and we are grateful for the confidence that she demonstrated in your will, and we are grateful for the encouragement that she was to us, that even to seek thee and to find thee, and that in her life she demonstrated that this was valuable to her. And we just pray that as we gather here today, that your presence would be felt, that the comfort of heaven would be with us, and We ask these things in Jesus' name. Now, if anyone would like to share a few words with us. It's an honor to be here today. I'm glad that it worked out to be present. And when I was thinking about, I hardly know how to refer to her other than Nana Ma, because we always called her that. So maybe I'll refer to her as Nana Ma. But when I was thinking about having a few words today, I was just, some wonderful memories came back to me. My mind turned to the 23rd chapter of Joshua. Just what Joshua was saying there at the end of his life. It mentions in the first verse that he came to pass after a long time, after that the Lord had given rest unto Israel from all their enemies round about, that Joshua waxed old and was stricken in age. You never know just how long life will be for each one of us. And I'm sure Nana Ma never expected to live this lengthy 100 years that she lived here on the earth. But there was something that happened at the beginning of her life that has influenced the end of her life. And there's a record. And this is what happened to Joshua. Something happened at the beginning of his life that affected the end of his life. And you can read back in the first chapter of Joshua, remember the story of Moses, now that he'd led the children of Israel out of Egypt. You know, there's no record of the children of Israel and them crossing the Red Sea in any of the history books of this world. None. There's a few mentions, little connections, maybe in some of the Egyptian history, but God saw fit to keep a record of it. Something that, and God kept record of the life of Joshua and how that these children of Israel, they came into the land of Canaan and how they settled there. And there's no other history in the world that has got a record of this. But God has a record of it because it was his hand that did it. And history will continue, and history is being written even today in the current events that we face in the world. And we're happy to live in this portion of history. But God is also writing a history according to he's writing a book, a record. There's a record. Events that are taking place in the world, unseen and hidden from the eyes of men. And individuals that he's spoken to in their lifetime, and a record of that. He has a very clear record of that. I remember sitting with my grandmother and her telling me stories, a little record of her experience when she was 11 years old, and the voice of God spoke to her, and she was moved, and it made a big change in her life. It's a record that, but it's not in any of the books of the county of Bloomfield or any of these history accounts that we have in Eastern Ontario. None of it's not written there. But God has a record of that. The day that he spoke to my grandmother, and she responded to that voice. Something changed for her in that response. And Joshua, it changed him, and he responded. And now it was at the end of his life. And that was one event that I remember my grandmother sharing with me. The Lord first spoke to her. And some of these events and records, the things that happen between us and God alone, they affect not only us, but they do have implications for others. It's a time when I remember when I was about 15, maybe older, and you remember how my grandma and grandpa they'd sold their house and they had purchased a trailer and a big truck, and they'd go down to Florida and spend some time down there. And then they would
come and stay with each of their children for a portion of time, and sometimes the grandchildren too. They parked their trailer there and they would spend some time with us. I remember this going to high school and just coming out every morning while they were there, and just maybe 15 minutes early coming into the trailer, knocking on their door, and cooking their toast and the peanut butter and banana sandwiches that they had. But there every morning when I went into that trailer, there was a special feeling there. And there were some Bibles. Both of them had their Bibles open, and they'd been sitting there reading. And the feeling that was in there was just a peaceful, calm feeling in that little trailer. Sometimes we'd speak about what they had read, and often it was just about the day. But the implication of having responded to the voice of God again for that day, it brought a change, an atmosphere that was present in that little trailer. I remember that. In 1994, I was called into this work, and I had spent a couple weeks at preparations at Elmont and the convention here at Picton. As it was custom, we'd come up the Saturday before the Sunday meeting at Picton, and we'd go to that day of convention before the Elmont convention. And so I spent the night with Grandma and Grandpa there. And the next morning, before we went to meeting, she sat down with me. She said, "I'd like to sing a hymn with you. It's hymn 306 that we have here written, and here on our paper. Today we'll sing it." And she said, "This is going to be your hymn." She said, "It's my hymn, but it's going to be your hymn too." And she said, especially the last verse. And then she read it to me. She said, "Sweet is a story you shall tell, at eventide when the day is done. The Lord is faithful, does all well. Him will I serve in the Lord." My grandmother was 72 years old at that time, and she didn't know how much longer she had to live, but she was already enjoying, as we heard, quoted above, the first hymn, some wonderful days of sweet content within the chambers of the King. I remember the feeling in the room that day, and I cherished that home throughout these last 28 years that I've been doing this work. And this hymn has often come to me. And because there's other things written in the hymn, like there's mountains, rocky slopes, there's valleys dark below. Those are things that she had passed through. But she was certain that the God that had led her through those things, the same God would lead us through too. And he's just waiting for us. Just waiting. He waits for thee. He'll lead thee through. I don't think that today, as we're here, I think that there's any doubt in our minds that the Lord was faithful. He does all well. That's what Joshua said in verse 14 of chapter 23. He said, "I'm standing here today, and I'm going all the way of the earth. And ye all know in your hearts and in your souls that not one thing has failed. Of all the good things the Lord your God spake concerning you, all have come to pass. One thing has not failed." Maybe one of the last visits that I had with Nanawa, she was here in Hastings Manor, and she had lost her mind at that point and she didn't really know who I was. But I remember sitting down next to her, and she smiled. She knew that I was like a worker. I could get that sense from her. And we chatted a little bit. And then she stopped and she said, "Do you see that lady over there?" And the lady was just slumped over in her chair, an elderly lady. She said, "She has nothing in her life." And then she turned over, "So you see that man over there? He's He's so sad. And then she looked up at me and she said, now, if there were some workers, they could have some meetings. And maybe they could get something that would make a difference in their life. And here's a woman who, having lost everything, maybe her own home, she's lost her independence, she's lost her ability to even think clearly. But what was very real to me that day was the treasure that the Lord had put in her heart, which had begun at 11 years old. It was still alive. And I can't be thankful enough for that today. Because, you know, my grandmother can't share your wealth in this world with me. And it wouldn't make any difference anyway. Because I've left all that behind. But what my grandmother did share with me is a treasure, a living treasure. And that heritage is in my heart. And I have that. And there has not failed until this day one word that God has promised to me. And I know that He will lead us through because we have something that's living and eternal. And there is nothing greater or precious that you could ever share with anyone than what has been shared with me from this heritage that my grandmother has shared. And these are just a few memories that I had thinking about my grandmother. And I'll always treasure that. I never, maybe one more thing, just that my mother, when she was desperate, in a day came in her life when she was very desperate. And I remember being in that home, and it wasn't a very pleasant place to live. It was a very dark place. Yeah. But the day came when my mother cried out for help. There were two women that came through the door. I didn't understand at the time, at age 5, what was going on, but they brought with them something into our home that was not there before. We lived in a home that had no hope, and it was dark, and we were lost. There was no future, but those two women brought something with them that brought light, brought salvation, and rescued. And heritage, we can't be thankful enough for. And glad that I have this precious heritage, that some that were willing to bear the price and lay down their lives and die daily, denying themselves the glory of the risen Christ. They kept that alive until the last day. Thank you.
I was thinking about one, I was thinking about the 10th chapter of the Gospel of John, and it says, verse 8, that enter in by the doors, the shepherd of the sheep, to him reported over the sheep hear his voice, and he calleth his own sheep by name, and driveth them out, and when he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. And we were early hearing about when she was young, and hearing the voice of the good shepherd, and responding, we're thankful for the difference that made in her life, and affected us. And it says in verse 9, that I am the door, by me if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture. Just like that, and then, like we heard you saying that first hymn about Mona's feeling about the way she spent her days, even in her old age, and it was because of hearing the voice of Jesus and responding, and it's like she found something daily that would satisfy and it says in verse 10, the thief cometh not for to steal and to kill and to destroy. I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for his sheep. We're thankful for Jesus and in God that we could have life and just even more than the natural life, that we could have eternal life and something we can know of now in this life and like it talked about having life more abundantly and we're thankful that that's what one was enjoying in lifetime and thankful that it's just the beginning of what God has planned for those that would follow His Son. And we're thankful, like it talked about Jesus speaking about Himself being the good shepherd and giving His life for the sheep and just like we're thankful that God cared about us so much that He was willing to give His Son and that we could learn to hear His voice and it says in verse 16 that other sheep I have which are not of this fold, then also I must bring which shall be my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd. And we were saying in the first verse of that hymn that He found me in the desert land and the waste and common in the wilderness. And we're just so thankful for the heart of God and towards the world today and the heart of Jesus that still one that people could get to, could learn the voice, to hear the voice of the Good Shepherd and follow that. And that they could enjoy that He's planning for them. In verse 27, Jesus said that my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and follow me. I give unto them eternal life, and they shall never perish. If they shall any man pluck them out of my hand, my Father which gave them me is greater than all, and no one is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand. We're just thankful, like we think about Mona, and even in her old age, and with mine going, and yet like no one could pluck her out of her Father's hand, and because of in lifetime of her hearing the voice of Jesus and responding, and we think about even like death and still like no one would be able to pluck her out of the Father's hand, and we're just thankful that this is the portion of anyone that would hear the voice of Jesus and respond and just to be safe in this life and for all eternity. I try to think about these texts.
I was thinking about this service. There was a parable that came to mind, and I'm not sure if there's parts of it that don't remind me so much of Mona, but there's some, the lesson in it very much reminds me of Mona. And when we were young, we would know Mona and Willard as Clint and Lisa's grandma and grandpa. But afterwards, when we got older, they had a different special meeting as we appreciated them and their support for us and just we appreciated that very much. The parable Jesus told it's in Luke 16, and it's about a man, and he had been, this man had been accused of wasting his master, his boss's goods, like the things. He was in charge of everything, and he had been accused of wasting it. Well, that part didn't remind me of Mona, but what happened in the story was that he realized that like he was going to be let go. Like he wasn't going to be able to stay there anymore. And he was wondering, what am I going to do? And he says, I can't bag, I can't dig, he didn't have the health to dig. And he said, I'm ashamed to beg. So he figured out what he would do. And so he called people that owed his master things. And he said, how much do you owe? He says, well, I owe like 100 measures of grain. He says, well, you write down 80. And then another one came and, what do you owe? Well, I owe so much oil. And he says, well, just write 50. And he made friends with all of these people. And then, so whenever he was put out of his place, then he had these friends around. He made friends with all these people, and they could receive him. So Jesus, when he gave the moral of the story, you could say, he said, make friends. He talked about the mammon of unrighteousness. That's just like things that we have. He says use that to make friends, that when you fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. And so I'm just thinking about Mona, like early on in her life, she realized that I am not able to stay here forever in this body. This body's been given to us. It's like we're a steward of. We can make decisions when we're really young, like a child. Others are making decisions for us. But then in the middle part of our life, we're making lots of decisions for ourselves. And we can make whatever decisions we want. We can choose whatever we want to do, we can do it. But Mona realized early on in life that that's not going to last forever. The day is going to come whenever whenever I'm going to have to let go of this life. And then what? What happens then? So she did exactly what this man did. She started to make friends that could receive her from the other side. And she did that. It's just like using what we have. So it could be time, it could be our time, it could be if our intelligence, could be our strength, it could be our substance, whatever it is. She chose to use that to make friends on the other side. And how do you do that? How does a person go about that? Well, we were singing one of the hymns, the brief hours are not lost in which you learn more of the Master and his hope in heaven. Like, we could do anything with our time, but she chose to take some of that time and put it towards learning about the Master and the hope that we have in heaven. She could have used that time otherwise, but it's like she chose to take that time to learn about that. Well, that would make friends on the other side. The Lord sees this person has taken an interest in eternity, and that's like a friendship with him. He really appreciates that. And then just the time that she would take every day. It might have, some days it might have put her at a, what would you say? It would put her at a loss in other areas of her life, but she wanted to take that time to get to know the Lord better. And so just the time she would take reading and praying and just asking God for help and getting his direction. And that's making friends on the other side, because how do you, like, just naturally speaking, how do we make friends? Is it not just like we get to know somebody and then we want to spend time with them? And as we spend more time with them, our the relationship grows. And well, that's what Mona did too, is that she just took the time to make friends from the other side. And then with substance too, it's like, how do you, I'm sure there was times, I don't know all of their life story, but I'm sure there's times when pennies maybe were hard to be pinched together. And yet there's maybe places that they felt they needed to be because it encouraged the life that was in them. That life of Christ. They went there, they felt God's presence. They just wanted to be near Him and maybe made sacrifices in other parts of their life so that they could be in places where God could speak to them. And it could be in helping others too. In Matthew 25, we read Jesus was telling the parable there and just showing that how we treat other people is how it's like the Lord feels that too. It's like making friends, allowing His Spirit to be in a person's life and just feeding that is like making friends on the other side. Well, we can go so far with people and more often than not, we feel like a lack in that. We feel like a lack even, sometimes there's even people we'd like to be a friend to, but we only have so much strength, or like as humans, we're lacking. But the Lord is not lacking. And the Lord is the best friend. He is the best friend we could have. And when we've gone as far with people as we can in this life, we just have to let it go. And but there's friends from the other side. And if we have got to know those friends in lifetime, they will take us. We don't have to be alone. My aunt, quite a few years ago, she was in the last hours of her life, and my grandma was sitting with her, but she had to leave. And my grandma just apologized. I'm so sorry, she says, that I have to leave. I'll be right back. I'm sorry to leave you alone. And my aunt just looked at my grandma. She says, I'm not alone. And isn't that a wonderful thing? That we can come to that point in life and it's like we're not alone. Like we don't have to fear. And I just appreciated that. Maybe just one more little verse that I appreciated thinking about Mona. And it's in the 10th chapter of Luke. When this certain man asked Jesus, he said, what is the greatest commandment, or what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus asked him, what is written in the law? What do you read? In verse 27, he answering said, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. And he, Jesus, said unto him, you've answered right, do this, and you'll live. And I just, like there's a time in our life when we have more strength. There's a time in our life when we have less strength. There's a time in our life when we have more mind. There's a time in our life when we have less mind. But the Lord isn't asking us about the strength we had yesterday. It's the strength we have today. And there could come a time in our life when like maybe our mind would go on us and we can't remember things anymore. But we could still love Him maybe with our strength, and we could love Him with our heart and our soul. Well, then there comes a day when our strength is gone, but we could still love Him with our heart and with our soul. And the heart to me is like the emotional part. Well, there comes a time maybe even our emotions are like, we don't have control of that anymore. But what's in our soul is for eternity. And we're just grateful that the Lord gives us time to cultivate things in our life. That when this final day comes, when He's not only the final day, it's these days leading up to it. Like, I just thinking of Mona in the nursing home, and like, her independence is gone, her strength is gone, her mind is gone, but just to know that there's somebody with her going through that experience, and He will go through with her to the end. And Jesus said, you do this and you'll live. And I just love that promise and things that are within all of our reach, and we're grateful for these ones that have gone on before. And in the hymn, the other hymn we'll sing here, He Waits for Thee, this was a hymn also that Mona loved, and she, I think she actually chose this for this service. And sometimes when I look at elderly people and say in the nursing home setting, and it's like, you could say the best of life is behind them. It's like, but when she's coming up to that stage in her life, this is what she's saying: fair are the prospects all ahead. That's wonderful. Fair are the prospects all ahead. Isn't it wonderful to come to that place in our life, realizing that as much as we've enjoyed life, the best is yet ahead of us. And fair are the prospects all ahead. And good the land He offers free. The one who all our fathers led will lead us through. He waits for Thee. So I just very much appreciate it. Just thinking of that, and I just thinking, whenever we're young, like say, just coming out of high school, and life is all ahead of us. And there's maybe some uncertainty, some fears, but life is ahead. And it just seemed to me, just thinking of Mona, that's how she was facing that part of her life. It's like, there might be some uncertainties, and we're not sure, but the prospects are fair ahead. It's like the whole life is all ahead of her. Whenever it would look like life was all leaving her, the best of life was all ahead of her, and that's how she felt. And I just appreciate thinking about that. So sing this hymn, and we'll ask the funeral directors to come over when we're done singing.
He waits for Thee, O do not linger on the way. The calls of fathers good to Thee, He'll guide and help you day by day. There are the promises all around, and the land He offers free. The one who all our fathers led will lead thee through. He waits for Thee. Would you not see what Abram had? The conscious guidance of God's hand, as launching forth He knew not where, He went to seek the promised land. There are the prospects all ahead, and good the land He offers free. The one who all our fathers led will lead thee through. He waits for Thee. Here are the mountains, rocky slope, hoary, the valleys dark below. This is the path that leads to God. Night when day is done, the Lord is faithful as a well. Him will I serve and Him alone. There are the prophets of God, He offers free, the one who walked for time will lead thee through. He waits for thee.
Would you please stand? And that's the flower bearers. Step over here. Just follow me. All bearers shall follow behind the flower bearers. No rush, no panic, no rush.
Earphones and AirPods were raw.
Just take the rest of the flowers up to the porch, please.
Yeah, I think so.